Today on the show, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be talking about a stunning piece of video that Glenn Greenwald tweeted out from CNN. And it's about censorship. And so, that half the left is very authoritarian, very reactionary, and not very left. And yes, you could be the idea that half the left is advocating fascism to fight fascism. That's what's going on. So if you're for censorship, you're for fascism. And the reason why you're for censorship is because you're trying to fight fascism. And so that's why people like Chomsky, people like me, Chris Hedges, Matt Taibbi, Glenn Greenwald have to be here, because there's soft-brained knuckleheads on the left who don't know anything about they have no sense of history. They have no sense of censorship. They think that you can censor some people and not others. They don't understand that censorship is always used against people who are anti-establishment. Whatever the establishment is, if you are anti it, you are out. You are censored. Okay. I want to play this real fast, and then we're going to get into this videotape. You got to check out this. Wait till I'm burying the lead, but I'm going to show you this first.
I do not think that the state ought to have the right to determine historical truth and to punish people who deviate from it. I'm not willing to give the state that right, even if they happen to
But are you denying that the gas chambers ever existed?
But I'm saying, if you believe in freedom of speech, you believe in freedom of speech for views you don't like. I mean, Goebbels was in favor of freedom of speech for views he liked, right? So was Stalin. If you're in favor of freedom of speech, that means you're in favor of freedom of speech precisely for views you despise. Otherwise, you're not in favor of freedom of speech. There's two positions you can have on freedom of speech. Now, you can decide which position you want. With regard to my defense of the utterly offensive, the people who express utterly offensive views, I haven't the slightest doubt that every commissar says, you're defending that person's views. No, I'm not. I'm defending his right to express them. The difference is crucial, and the difference has been understood outside of fascist circles since the 18th century.
Now, that's key, because I was recently accused of defending fascists instead of being lauded for standing up and sticking my chin out for a free speech principle. So people on the left came at me saying I was defending fascists when what I was actually doing was exactly what Chomsky said. I was standing up for a principle which people who I find reprehensible fall under. That's such a scummy trick that people do, such an underhanded way to argue when they say, why are you defending fascists? Or why are you defending Alex Jones? Or why are you defending Trump? Or why are you defending Nazis? Why are you defending white supremacy? This is what people like to say when you're standing up for a principle of free speech. That's what bad faith knuckleheads who are authoritarian and want fascism to solve fascism. Those are lots of people on the left, and you know exactly who they are. So here's what happened. Here's Glenn Greenwald tweeted this out. And he says, here's a former Facebook executive. Now, you know Facebook has a revolving door at the White House, right, with Joe Biden's administration and regulatory bodies. Here's a former Facebook executive on CNN explicitly urging that the same tactics that we used in cooperation with the U.S. security state to remove ISIS from the internet now should be used against conservative influencers to deprogram everybody to believe the CNN liberal consensus. Do you think he's making this up? This is stunning. Here we go. Here we go. And by the way, why does Brian Stelter always look like he's excited that somebody put him on camera? I mean, is it because he has no business being there? Okay. Brian Stelter is like if a committee farted and became a person. That's what Brian Stelter is. Okay. Really, Jimmy? A censorship thing, and you got to put a fart joke in it?
Information crisis that has been perpetuated, in my view, by platforms like the one we're used to work, Facebook, as well as Twitter and others.
It's really hard, because what's happening is people are able to seek out the information that makes them feel good. That is what's happening, is that people have so much choice now.
And that's why people watch CNN and MSNBC, because they seek out information that makes them feel good. And Ron, I don't know if you remember being at the LA Podfest a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, when one of my favorite female stand-ups got up on stage and said, I just want to turn on Rachel Maddow. I don't care what it is as long as it's negative about Trump. It doesn't even have to be true. Do you remember that?
I do remember that. Yeah, I do remember that. And yeah, I mean, that's why people tune into cable news usually. They want their confirmation bias.
Yeah, but what this guy is saying is that people, they don't get confirmation bias at CNN or MSNBC. They only get it at on YouTube or right-wing outlets. They don't get it at MSN. Isn't that amazing? So, all right, let's go back to this video.
They can choose what their news sources are. They can choose what influencers they want to follow. And they can try to seal out anything that helps them question that. And I think...
Hey, people are finding their own information in America. Let's get to the bottom of this. People are searching out news information on their own. What is going... I need an investigation. And we need to shut this down. Okay, here we go.
That gets to a really core issue with how our freedoms as Americans and the way we've treated press freedom in the past is being abused by these actors. In that
the way we've treated press freedom is being abused by these actors. What does that mean, Ron? So there are people telling stuff that is outside of the official narrative. The establishment oligarch-approved narrative, and that's what he means by abusing the free speech protections, right?
Well, I mean, at CNN, sometimes it's just really nice to sit in a tower or on a panel or maybe stand in front of a green screen and just pontificate about whatever, is advertiser-friendly. But other people are saying, hey, we should go to a place like Flint or Standing Rock or maybe even Syria, and tell people what we see and what's going on. And then that puts pressure on something like CNN to actually do that as well. And that's abusive.
Okay, here we go. There's more.
We have given a lot of leeway, both in the traditional media and on social media, to people to have a very broad range of political views. And
oh, thank you. Did you hear what he's giving us leeway to use the First Amendment. Isn't that nice? We're allowed to have our own views. Thank you, Mr. Facebook, for giving us the leeway to have our own political views.
It is nice. He must have had a fun weekend and he's just feeling generous.
It is now in the great economic interest of those individuals to become more and more radical. And I think
so this is the thing. So people who do news that is outside the establishment narrative are just doing it in an insincere, cynical way so they can get money. Unlike CNN that does this out of the goodness of their hearts. CNN, I don't know if you know, they don't take advertising. They're totally funded by small dollar donations to people who just want information. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. They're funded by the people that we expose here, like the military-industrial complex, Wall Street, Big Pharma, and the health insurance companies. That's who funds them. That's why they're radical. You know what's radical? Being against Medicare for all in the middle of a pandemic. That's what CNN is. They're against Medicare for all in the middle of a pandemic. That's radical. You know what's radical? Being for every war. That's what CNN is for. That's radical. You know what else is radical? Being against journalism like Julian Assange. That's radical. So they want to make mainstream views like we have, anti-war, Medicare for all, and pro-journalism. They want to make those views seem radical so they can now deplatform us because we're being radical, because we're not doing the bidding of the military-industrial complex, Wall Street, Big Pharma, or health insurance companies. That's what's radical, because that's who pays their checks. Okay, here we go.
One of the places you can see this is on the fact that you now have competitors to Fox News on their right, OANN and Newsmax, which are carried by all the major cable networks. who are trying to now outflank Fox on the right, because the moment Fox introduced any kind of realism into their reporting, immediately a bunch of people chose to put themselves into a sealed ecosystem. And they can do that both on cable, they can do it online, and that becomes a huge challenge of figuring out how do you bring those people back into the mainstream of fact-based reporting. And
how do you bring those people back into the fact-based mainstream news reporting that war is good, Medicare for all is bad, and journalism needs to be prosecuted? That's their official mainstream news media. And Flint, Michigan doesn't need to be covered. And $2,000 checks will overheat the economy. That's the approved news from CNN, that this guy only wants us to. How do we get people back into believing complete neoliberal claptrap? How do we do that? So as Chomsky, again, they'll never have Chomsky on one of these panels, will they? No. They'll never have a guy who actually wrote the seminal book about censorship, about the news media in the United States and how the news media actually works to manufacture consent. Because that's what they're doing right now. What Brian Stelter and these two radicals...
Chris Krebs.
These two radicals, who's that guy?
Chris Krebs.
Who
he
is
was
he?
a former U.S. cybersecurity.
What
and they
these
are
two-
now in partnership, both
What
of them.
these two radicals, along with this corporate tool, are doing is they're radicalizing their own viewership into being afraid of accurate information. They're actually doing the exact thing they're claiming other people are doing. They're radicalizing people into being against things that are super normal and mainstream, like Medicare for all, like supporting journalism, like, being anti-war and for peace. So they're actually radicalizing people. That's what CNN is doing. Guess what MSNBC did? It radicalized people in the same way against the candidate of the worker and for the pro-war, pro-corporate, anti-worker candidate, Joe Biden. That's what MSNBC did. Ron, am I saying something that's wrong?
No. Well, this whole segment throughout the entire thing, it makes me think of the movie Spinal Tap, which is a fun movie I haven't seen in a long time, but there's a scene there where they're talking about their band and all these ideas that they have and all these issues that they got to sort out. But never at any point do they talk about, getting good at their instruments or being a better band or making songs. And similarly here, he's talking about all these sources that are out there and people have choices and man, what are we going to do? And never at any point does anyone on this panel say, gee, maybe part of the problem is we're not doing our jobs as a supposed news outlet. Maybe we're failing the public miserably by not actually doing news and instead just doing corporatocracy-approved PR. Maybe we're the problem. That never crosses anyone's mind on that panel.
Never. Not once. Okay, here we go. There's more to this.
to get us all back into the same consensual reality.
And can you? Is that possible? Seems like that's an open question.
It's hard. I mean, I think we got to do a couple things. One, there needs to be an intentional work by the social media companies collaborating together to work on violent extremism in the same way they worked on ISIS. When I started at Facebook in 2015, the number one challenge from a content perspective was the abuse of social media by the Islamic State. And there was a collaboration between the tech companies and between the tech companies and law enforcement to make it impossible for them to use the internet to recruit and radicalize mostly young Muslim men at the time around the world. Now we're talking about domestic audience in the United States. And the challenge is going to be partially that, ISIS did not have a domestic constituency in the United States Congress. But there is over half of the Republicans in Congress voted to overturn the election. And there will be a continual political pressure on the companies to not take it seriously. So I think first you have to focus on those violent extremists, and those companies have to be brave in that way. And second,
and they have to be, did you hear that, Ron? They have to be brave. First, you have to focus on people we don't like the most, and you're going to take away their free speech against the Constitution, and you have to be brave. You have to treat American citizens exactly like we treated violent Islamic extremists who we had declared war on. American citizens are just like that. That's what he's saying, right, Ron?
Yeah, and I like how Brian Stelter asked him, like, is this possible? Like, as if he invented the word. Like, he's like, is this possible? How can we get everybody back to this milquetoast bullshit we're passing off as news? And he's like, well, Brian, the long answer that I'm going to use as many words as possible to say is we just make sure they don't have any other options.
Jimmy,
this is riveting stuff.
I just want to point out that both Chris Krebs and Alex Stamos, they're both partners in a cybersecurity consultancy firm. How would they profit from taking this stand?
So Steph makes a great point. Now, we found this out with those, I forget the name of that company that got caught inventing fake Russian bots. Now,
Was it CrowdStrike? Was it CrowdStrike?
No, it
wasn't.
wasn't. No, it was a different name. It wasn't CrowdStrike, but we've covered it here on the show 3 times, and I can't remember the name. I'll think of it. But they came from the intelligence community. They came from the security state, and they were writing the reports that the Senate committee was basing all of their news releases on that said that Russians had invaded the country and there's Russian bots controlling every social media. And turned out those same people got caught inventing fake Russian bots. They didn't get did they get their Facebook page taken out? I think that one of them did. One of the guys who ran that company. But that was the company that the Senate for years based all of their Russiagate stuff on. Was that company. And what was that company's business? Providing you cybersecurity. So it's in their interest to make you fearful, to fearmonger you that you might be vulnerable to this cybersecurity. So you got to hire them. And so what they're doing is saying you can't go to YouTube to get news because those guys are radical and they're nuts and they don't have the real facts like we do. Because why? Because we're competitors. We're competitors, and it's all about money. So they want to make you think that those people, they tell you those facts that don't jibe with what we say for money, whereas we tell you the facts that are real for free. No, you're making billions of dollars. Ramping up fear-mongering around Trump and Russia made you guys billions of dollars, and it was all made up. It was all made up. It was all phony. And we debunked it here on this show. Aaron Mate won an award for his debunking of Russiagate, which you guys still push. So again, this is Orwell. This is the establishment, and they can't sell you neoliberalism anymore. And so what they have to do is get control of the news and the narrative, and so you don't have anywhere else to go. What they're trying to do is take away our printing press. So too many people have printing presses. That's what they're saying. Let's watch. There's more to this. It gets worse.
We have to turn down the capability of these conservative influencers to reach these huge audiences. There are
he's on television saying we have to turn down the ability of people who are opposite me politically to be able to reach people with their message.
We only have advantage in the world. We're only there's like 3 cable news networks. We're one of them. We're piping everywhere, and nobody watches us still. This can't possibly be on us.
People on YouTube, for example, that have a larger audience than daytime CNN, and they are extremely radical and pushing extremely radical views. And so it's up to the Facebooks and YouTubes in particular to think about whether or not they want to be effectively cable networks.
So I don't know if you caught what he said. He said there are YouTube channels that have larger audiences than CNN. And they're pushing radical views. Oh, you mean like the Syrian war propaganda is propaganda? You mean that? You mean Medicare for all is actually cheaper than the current system? You mean those kind of radical views? What kind of radical views? You mean that Russiagate is a complete hoax set up by the intelligence community, Democratic Party, and the corporate media? You mean that kind of radical views? Because that's the kind of radical views you guys won't ever say. Why is it that you guys don't ever bring anyone on to tell the truth about war? Why is it whenever there's a panel about war, it's 3 people who are pro-war? Why is that? What kind of radicalization are you guys doing? I know exactly what kind of radicalization you're doing. You're radicalizing your audience to be pro-war because you get most of your funding from the military-industrial complex. That's what that is. And these guys are trying to make money off of it. Mm-hmm. They're trying to make money off of scaring you about alternative news sources. Freedom of speech is super dangerous to these guys, this guy from Facebook and this other tool from the security state. You can't let people have freedom. You can't let people have freedom of speech because there's bad people out there. There are bad people out there since the beginning of the earth. We need free speech. Okay, there's more to this. It gets worse.
Information. And then we're going to have to figure out the OANN and Newsmax problem. That these companies have freedom of speech, but I'm not sure we need Verizon, AT&T.
These companies have freedom of speech, but we got to take it away from them. And so he says these companies have freedom of speech. I'll back it up.
These companies have freedom of speech, but I'm not sure we need Verizon, AT&T, Comcast, and such to be bringing them into tens of millions of homes. This is allowing people to seek out information if they really want to, but not pushing it into their faces. I think.
Ron, you want to say something?
That's just like, I mean, what does he mean by all these cable companies? CNN is owned by Time Warner. You're owned by a cable company. I mean, that's like saying, are you going to say that, Ron Placone brought to you by Cox because that's who he gets his internet from?
Well, so what he just said, and let me explain it to you, what he just said, was that cable companies, not cable news outlets like CNN, he's saying cable companies like Spectrum, Time Warner Cable, which is, I think, the only cable you can get in New York City, he's saying they shouldn't have to carry news outlets. That's what he's saying. He's saying they shouldn't have to carry news outlets on their cable. Verizon shouldn't have to carry, you shouldn't be able to get them on your phone. So if I wanted to watch a news outlet that this guy doesn't approve of, he would want them not allowed on your phone, Verizon not to allow them, AT&T not to allow them on your cable. That's what he's saying. That's what he just said. That's what he's saying.
Is where we're going to have to go here.
Alex and Chris, thank you both.
Not one pushback question, not one follow-up, nothing. Just, yep. Well, you're right. We got to start censoring. So that's straight up propaganda. That's like right out of if 1984 had a sketch in it of the news, that would be it. If George Orwell wrote a sketch about the news, that would be it. And that's the tool right in the middle. That's why he was chosen, because nothing that guy said made him think of a question. Nothing that guy said made him think of a pushback. Not even a devil's advocate question. Nothing from Brian Stelter. By the way, he's the media critic at CNN. Now you know why they hired him? Because he's incredibly incurious. He never has a thought. Ever.
We have to turn down the capability of these conservative influencers to reach these huge audiences. There are people on YouTube, for example, that have a larger audience than daytime CNN, and they are extremely radical and pushing extremely radical views. And so it's up to the Facebooks and YouTubes in particular to think about whether or not they want to be effectively cable networks for disinformation. And then we're going to have to figure out the OANN and Newsmax problem. That these companies have freedom of speech, but I'm not sure we need Verizon, AT&T, Comcast, and such to be bringing them into tens of millions of homes. This is allowing people to seek out information if they really want to, but not pushing it into their faces, I think is where we're going to have to.
Don't push it into their faces. Like CNN is on in every airport, every bar, everywhere CNN is on, and pushing war, always pushing pro-war. You don't want to push into people's faces. You mean like we do? Like how we push our stuff into people's faces. We shouldn't push stuff into people's faces, except we totally want people to only consume the drivel that we pass off as news. So Glenn Greenwald said, for all the talk about how siloed off Fox News is, MSNBC, New York Times, and NPR are just as siloed, talking almost only to Democrats, and thus rarely telling them what they don't want to hear for fear of angering their audience. And CNN is not far behind, also overwhelmingly talking to Democrats. So when they come out and say, people are siloed off and they don't get the real information because they're only, well, guess what? Democrats only watch certain news. Republicans only watch certain news. Watch this. So there's Fox News, mostly Republicans, very little Democrat. 6% of their viewership is Democrat. But you go down to CNN, almost 79%, 8 out of 10 people who watch CNN are Democrats. So they're broadcasting to mostly only Democrats. NPR, even same thing, 87. NPR, almost 9 out of 10 people listening to NPR are Democrats. New York Times, even worse. 91% of the people who read the New York Times are Democrats. MSNBC, even worse. 95% of the people who watch MSNBC are Democrats. So they're so this idea that just right-wingers are siloed off is complete garbage. CNN is a silo. MSNBC is a silo. NPR is a silo. So that's super informative, I think. I think that's super informative. And by the way, why wouldn't Brian Stelter bring on someone who has a counter narrative to that? Why wouldn't they have a healthy debate about censorship? Why not bring on Noam Chomsky or Glenn Greenwald or Chris Hedges or Matt Taibbi or Aaron Mate? Why not bring on someone like that, some award-winning journalists who disagree with the establishment-approved narrative? That's why you got to have free speech, because they'll never give you a... How many people were brought on MSNBC and CNN to give you the countervailing ideas about Russiagate? Zero. How many times they bring on Glenn Greenwald or Aaron Mate to debunk their narrative on Russiagate on MSNBC? Zero. The last time Glenn Greenwald was on MSNBC, I think, was 2016. They'll never bring on Aaron Mate, me, Kyle Kalinske, Glenn Greenwald. Nobody who is on the forefront of debunking their propaganda is going to be invited on. They're not there to do news. If you read Manufacturing Consent, what is the news media there to do? Their number one job is to manufacture consent. And what does that mean? That means to make you think we need to go to war. Whatever the establishment wants, they're there to make you think it's good. They're there to make you internalize it. So you think war is good and Medicare for all just can't happen. And we can't defund the police, then there'd be nobody caught. You can't. Do you understand? And it's just you can't have jobs. You got to have. You know what I'm saying? That's what they're there for, to make you think that spending 10 times more than the next country on bombs is normal. That's what the news media is there for. Hey, everybody, this is the part where I tell you where all our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then this is why I tell you to join our premium program and get extra content, but nobody's got a fucking job. So just enjoy the video.